And so, good afternoon and welcome to the February 3rd regular meeting of Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. The consent agenda. I need a mover and a seconder to take all three, A, B, and C together. Moved by Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor O'Brien. All those in favor? Opposed? What? Sure.
Thank you, Your Worship. So on number C, it just doesn't indicate that it's changed to February 19th. That's all. I just wanted to. Number 7A.
Okay,
So,
I'll bring that up. All
Thank
right.
you.
So, where is it? Yeah. Let me just get, oh, you got it there, thank you. All right, just what Councillor Wilson is bringing up, and very, very correctly, it doesn't suggest that it's going to be brought up at the next meeting. We have deferred this until the February 19th meeting. And the reason we did that was so that all of council was here so that we could all debate it. Kind of been taking the approach that on the major items that we're addressing, that all council should be sitting here so they have an input as to what is going on. And Councillor Chandler is not with us today, so that's why we did that. All right, thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. I need a vote on this. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. We have two delegations this afternoon. The first one, they have a small group with them. It's the Oceanside, Parksville Oceanside Pickleball stakeholders requesting for pickleball courts in the community park. Please come forward, and I think you're all set and ready to go, if I'm not mistaken. We are.
Good afternoon, Mayor Main and councillors and city staff. My name is Keith Hosking. I am the president of the OPC Pickleball Club here in Parksville. My co-presenter today is John Kuzbik, who is the president of the Parksville Oceanside Pickleball Society. We are here on behalf of an estimated 1,100 plus pickleball players in the Oceanside area, nearly 500 of whom are members of our two Parksville clubs, and some of whom are here today in attendance as well. We'd like to thank you for allowing us to appear as a delegation today, and we'll take about 10 minutes of your time to show you a proposal on keeping pickleball in the Parksville Park. So our purpose today is really to present a viable option to council to consider repurposing and refurbishing the pickleball courts in Parksville Community Park versus the high costs of developing new courts at Springwood Park. So our proposal is to refurbish and repurpose what already exists in the park. This means that pickleball would remain in the Parksville Community Park, and we feel this is a fiscally responsible option that adds vitality to the park, promotes health, wellness, and fitness for participants of all ages. There are several benefits to keeping pickleball in Parksville Community Park. It's a central location in downtown Parksville that draws people into the core on a daily basis and into the Parksville Community Park. Some benefits would be there would be 8 dedicated and 9 set-up takedown courts realized as a result of this. It would promote public and club play on a regular basis downtown in the park. This would also benefit all skill levels of pickleball players, everything from the absolute beginners who are taking up the sport for the first time perhaps to the more competitive players. It would also be a benefit to schools for instruction and play as well, and also for youth and family play. Refurbishing and repurposing means greater safety and greater opportunities for physical health, well-being, and social play. So what's included in refurbishing the courts. While both venues that are there at present, the present tennis courts and the lacrosse box, would have new sports anti-slip surfaces and appropriate court markings for their particular sport. The current tennis courts would become 8 dedicated pickleball courts with permanent net systems. The lacrosse box would remain multi-sport with 9 setup and takedown courts, and that is 3 more than what is currently there. There are currently 6 there. We feel this is a fiscally responsible option when it comes to refurbishing and repurposing these particular venues. First of all, doing so would be approximately 1/4 of the Springwood cost. It would be 1/3 of the cost if foundation contingencies are required, which we believe is the more likely scenario. The infrastructure is already in place. You have ample parking, you have good sanitary washrooms, you have access to clean drinking water, you have equipment storage in the park, and you obviously have the venues already there in the form of the court enclosures. There would be no additional city maintenance required other than what is currently budgeted for when it comes to regular maintenance on those courts. The reserve and maintenance funds that are currently in the budget are likely to cover the repurposing and refurbishing costs. And it would realize 5 more courts at the Parksville Community Park than the Springwood proposal, for a total of 17 courts. How does the community at large benefit? Well, it is supported by the tennis and lacrosse organizations, including Aerosmith Tennis Club, Oceanside Minor Lacrosse, as well as MLA Michelle Stillwell. It would draw 100+ people daily into the downtown core and local businesses during the pickleball season. It means that Parksville could be a possible host for provincial, regional, and local pickleball tournaments, and also means Parksville could be a potential host for the 55+ BC Games, of which pickleball is a very big part, by the way. So, refurbishing and repurposing these courts as well would promote a healthy lifestyle for the citizens and residents of Parksville. So in conclusion, we would like to thank you for considering the many advantages to refurbishing and repurposing the existing tennis and lacrosse venues. In so doing, you are supporting more than 500 current and many more 500 current club members and many more future pickleball enthusiasts in the Parksville area. We feel this is a very viable option. It provides much more for a lot less than Springwood did, and it is achievable for the majority of the 2020 outdoor season. Thank you. That's our proposal, and we would take any questions you would have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Okay, Councillor Greer, do you have your hand up? All right, and Councillor Patterson, Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks very much for your presentation. I think you put a lot of thought into this, and I appreciate your efforts because it certainly looks like it would save us a lot of money in the long run. The only question I have is, in one of your places here, the tennis courts will become 8 dedicated pickleball courts. You're not eliminating the tennis courts, are you?
These would be 8 dedicated pickleball courts with permanent pickleball nets. The tennis courts would not be there anymore.
I say, have you talked to the tennis players? I'm not so sure how many tennis players there are.
Yeah, well, the Aerosmith Tennis Club, I believe, has about 140 to 150 members, and we have a letter that we have provided as well from the Aerosmith Tennis Club supporting this venture. They have no interest in the tennis courts for club play whatsoever at the present time in the park, mainly because there's too many lines there, and it's a multi-sport facility, and it's in their terms, it's considered to be useless for club play for tennis.
That's good. Good. Thank you.
Councillor Patterson, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a couple questions. Thank you so much for your presentation and for the audience participation here as well. The time frame for refurbishing and cost, you're looking to try and have this, or basically have a motion to have this for the 2020 season. So I have a couple questions on cost and the time frame, and when does the season begin?
Our season begins, well, we have, we're two different clubs. I guess Popster season begins April 1st, correct? And goes till the end of October. In the case of OPC Pickleball Club, our season officially begins May 1st and ends September the 30th. The costs, we feel that the cost, we've taken all of the costs that came out of the Springwood RFP, basically, all the above-ground costs, and we know what it's going to cost for permanent pickleball nets. We know what it's going to cost for a proper sports surface, for remarking and so on. The only thing we do not know at this time is if there were contingencies required, what the cost would be to take out, for example, the tennis courts right now. Would probably need, there's some root mediation that would be needed and so on, and the tennis courts would have to be probably the foundation taken out and redone, but that's it. The thing about the costs is as well, there is no need at the park to for any extra cost with respect to land removal of trees or slope mediation, retaining walls, or anything like that. So we feel that that our costs are very, very close to what we say here. So.
Under that, I think. Councillor O'Brien. Oh, sorry, you have another one?
Can I have a follow-up, and then I'll have future ones
Future.
after?
All right.
Thank you. In one of your slide presentations, you mentioned take down courts of 9 of those. So who would be maintaining, and where would nets be stored?
Okay.
The box lacrosse courts are currently being played on or being used by our pickleball club. There's storage provided in a storage facility in the park. So at the beginning of play and at the end of the play, those courts are put up and taken down. And we're doing that on a daily basis, 6 days a week, 6 days a week as it is. So that would be nothing new.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to the, Keith and John, thank you very much for a great presentation. A couple questions here, if I may. Your total membership right now in between your two clubs, it was again?
It's nearly 500 members.
500.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I want to congratulate you for collaborating with each other to get together on one facility anyways. It makes it a lot more reasonable for anyways as a city anyways to run this, so I appreciate that effort that you've made yourselves. Further to your 500 members and that type of thing, and most of them are here tonight. So it's good, it's great to see, but the other thing is that I have to ask, so obviously you are scheduling your games in between the two associations through a course of a week when you're in full play mode type of thing in the spring, summer. So the thing is that you must have some kind of scheduling organization so that you can get so many people on it at each time, like so that the courts are being used all the way through the week. How much, keep with that in mind, how much space or time would be available for, say, where you're going to have the permanent court set up in the old tennis facility there? How much space or time would be allocated or able to be used by the regular public? A family showing up for a picnic and just using those permanent nets. Is there going to be any time left? Because if you guys keep on growing, I can see you guys asking for lights next so you can play 24 hours a day. That's next. I didn't say we're going to, but so just will there be time available for the regular public for drop-ins?
Absolutely. With 24 hours, by the way, there'd be lots of time, but for public play. But at the present time, the OPC Pickleball Club uses the tennis courts at the present time. We use them right now from 8 o'clock until 1 o'clock, 8 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. every day. Well, actually, right now, 5 days a week last year. This year, we're increasing our time in order to accommodate our members and give more time for different types of play and so on, because we grew by 15% last year, and we anticipate to grow again this year. So what we've done is we've actually increased our time this year from 8 o'clock a.m. till 2 o'clock p.m. Okay, but and typically those are our times that we play there as well. So.
At the lacrosse courts, it's about the same time. We start at 8 and around noon. And I think that if this proposal goes ahead, the advantage of it that I see is that the two clubs would work even closer together, and perhaps at one point becoming one club, so that all the pickleball players will have an opportunity to play on the dedicated courts and the put up and take down courts.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I hadn't really planned on asking a question, but Councillor O'Brien.
I'm just going by the person who keeps my list. I'm sorry.
Councillor O'Brien brought up a good point. Thank you, by the way, for the presentation. It was excellent. And I think it sounds like a great idea, but I think the question Councillor O'Brien asked about public use of space was one that I would be concerned about. And I guess to our CEO, there are tennis courts in Springwood, I believe? Mm-hmm. Yes. So people can go there and use those. And that's all I'm going to ask for now. I'm sure I'll think of some more questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fraz?
Thank you, and through your worship to Keith and John. I appreciate hearing that the tennis groups are supportive of this. I think what you brought to us makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. I'm curious about the lacrosse courts. You didn't mention, you said that there was support from the lacrosse players. Would this change affect their play, their courts, or the surface? What do they have to say about it?
We have had conversations with the group, and they're fully supportive of having the new surface on play. And what we're proposing would not have any effect or impact of taking more time on the courts, so that that would not interfere with their program.
If I may, another, this one's to staff. Just curious with they mentioned about the time frame they're looking for the 2020 season. What is the staff workload like to accomplish that? And then I guess attached with that too, through to the delegations, would you guys be satisfied if it was something that could come for the following year if it wasn't able to be accomplished for this year? So I guess first to our staff.
I'm assuming that's coming to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I may, through to Councillor Fraz, we have a work plan that does not include this project yet, but what we would do with council direction is we can remove a different project. We can't add this project and then still do all of the other projects that we're planning, but we can come to council for some direction on what this would basically bump off the list.
Okay. Councillor Patterson, you had another. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to our CAO, if I could get a little bit of background information in regards to the Springwood Park and our budget and the RFP. Thank you.
Sure.
If I may, Your Worship, I think the Director of Operations will have better background on that than I do.
So if I understand, through the mayor, if I understand your question, you're asking what the budget is for which
currently, so my question, I'll reiterate, would be the current budget that for 2020 for the Springwood Park, and whether that had gone out to an RFP?
Sorry, this is for the...
For the Springwood, specifically, because there's a line item in the budget for...
For the pickleball?
Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry. I was trying to see if it was tennis or pickleball. So we did have quotes back, and they were significantly higher than expected, I think in the neighborhood of $1 million. So we'll have to, we'll work with council, and if the report comes back to council on whether we consider the community park or not. I believe the Parks Committee is going to be considering the location of the pickleball. So I think the Parks Committee will be coming back, which has membership from staff and council on it to recommend that.
Follow up, Your Worship?
Please.
Do you know when that would be coming back?
If I may, Your Worship, the terms of reference for the community park or the Parks Committee is currently being finalized. So that committee will. I'm trying to think if it's been scheduled, the first meeting of that. So it will be scheduled shortly, and this is one of the items that's going to be on the agenda for them.
If you will.
Okay, if I may, Worship, in previous years, we had about $320,000, I believe, slated for pickleball. Then when the quotes came back in, they were, as Director Figuera mentioned, significantly higher. So we are preparing our final budget for consideration for council, and we've just finalized the work plan, which currently does not include any of this proposal, obviously, as this has just come forward. But council can give staff direction to either bring back that $320,000 if that's going to cover the cost of the work, or alternatively, council can add budget or change the budget as we head into final. And we have just hired a new manager of parks who is working. We actually have a draft terms of reference to come to that committee, and we're anticipating starting the meeting in the next couple of weeks, well in time for the final budget discussions. And what we would request from council is really just direction on where this falls in the queue. We have a set amount of time, obviously, in staff resources, but we are flexible in terms of what takes the sequence in terms of those projects. So certainly I think it would be reasonable to know probably in a month at the March meeting, second meeting in March, council would probably be in a good position to get information back from the members and some more specifics on budget. I think that's a doable timeframe.
Okay. A couple questions from me, if I may. First off, have we spent any of that $320,000 on plans getting ready for the RFP? Do we know if is it a full $320,000 that are left on this year's budget still? Oh, he's hiding back in there, but we're going to get to him.
If I may, through your worship, engineering helped facilitate some of this with operations support. I believe it started last year or even the year before. There is a portion of the I think it's $320,000 that was spent to do some preliminary site investigation, geotech, and kind of a conceptual siting report with some options and analysis and prices. I think we're about 30 to 50 grand in to that $320,000. And right now we've picked up pens, and so there's no more further monies being expended. So we would have the ability to cancel the contract or to pick it up and amend it depending on the resolution.
All right. Now, so to carry this one step further, we have approximately, taking the director on at his word, that we have about $290,000 sitting there that we're going to be can we carry this forward into either 2020 or 2021 budget? Is that feasible?
If I may, Your Worship, what we are trying to do more of now is not carry forward items that haven't started. So we would most likely re-budget this amount for the final budget, and then we would have some time for staff to look at the proposal and perhaps even meet with individuals to find out exactly what's required and come back with a more accurate estimate of what it would cost to do the work. And then that could be discussed at the committee level, and then recommendations would come to council during budget. I think having it done by April this year is I would say not feasible at this point.
Okay, I'm not, that part of it I'm not, but allow me one more question if I want, and then I'll come back to you if I could. Is it feasible to complete what they're asking for $290,000? It would be, since you've already gone a little bit towards this, does it make sense to you? Or are we talking $500,000 or $600,000? All that makes a bit of a difference as to how we're going to approach this. Yeah, well, I thought we did, just new flooring and that kind of stuff, but. Let 'em s-
If I may, through your worship, it's a bit abstract of a concept for me right now. From the director of operations, it sounds like the tennis courts are in fact failing and may need some more substantive repair or renewal. But we probably should visit it and do a proper estimate on it and detail exactly what would need to be included in the scope before
Before we get.
if I threw a number out right now, it probably wouldn't do us any service.
All right, that's fair enough. We need to let these fine people, they've been waiting for the better part of 3 years for this. I think it's time that we either fish or cut bait, as they say. And I think we need to get this done yesterday. So I'm going to go over to Councillor O'Brien, then to Councillor Patterson, and we'll wrap it up for that, because we have another delegation.
Thank you, Your Worship. At this time, regarding pickleball, with council's approval, I'd like to propose a motion at this time. But it's regarding the pickleball, taking it the next step, but I realize I require council's unanimous decision to propose a motion at this time, do I not? No?
No, if you're proposing notice of motion, you're fine.
Okay, thank you. I would like to propose the following motion: to request staff meet with these two associations to determine the exact requests for the proposed surface improvements to the tennis court and lacrosse box in the community park as soon as possible, to enable staff to prepare a report to council for estimated costs and implementation times.
If you could pass that over to staff, then you don't have to write it all down. All right, we're doing a notice of motion, so it's come up on the next meeting? Are you okay with that?
No,
You want to do it today?
today.
All right, then, I'm sorry, then you are going to need and we will take that. All in favor of that motion being handled today? There you go. So now,
Okay, thanks.
I need a seconder for the motion. We've kind of done that out of step, but we'll live with it. You're seconding it? All right. Discussion? Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. So through you, directed to appropriate staff. And I'm not entirely sure how to put this, but if we were to take Springwood off the table, and even if we thought about we meet with the two organizations as soon as possible, to work towards their season, even if we could do these in phases, would be maybe part of my recommendation, like if we were to redo the tennis courts as a priority.
Okay. Fair enough comment. Councillor Greer, and then Councillor O'Brien.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'm just not quite sure or clear on that motion. This is just to consult with the pickleball players. We're not going to go ahead with this situation because we haven't got anything in the budget as of yet.
Refer it back to council.
If I may, Your Worship, to response to Councillor Greer, yeah, my intent is to consult with the pickleballers to get the exact requirements that they want, which would then allow for our staff to send out RFPs and to get a quotation so that they could get a cost for this project properly, so that then we as council can approve that figure as it is. I don't like giving a blank check, as Mr. Doxey has figures for Springwood Court type of thing, but he certainly hasn't got figures available for the asphalting of the two courts in the community park. And my thoughts on Councillor Patterson's, I believe it would be more advantageous to just go for an RFP to asphalt, to redo the surfaces in both the tennis court and the lacrosse at the same time. For cost purposes, for contractors, I think we'd get a better price that way, and we would have a better chance of getting those surfaces done. And it's really just repaving, unless we run into some underground surface issues with the tennis court, with some roots and so forth, but I believe it could be done relatively quickly if we just get the costing estimate back from staff.
That's what I was interested in, getting the costing. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Greer.
Councillor Greer, is that what you were going to speak to? So you're free. Councillor Patterson, then we're going to take a vote.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to kind of reiterate back to Councillor O'Brien that it's not just the asphalt, it's the anti-slip. And I'm sure that these fine folks are really looking forward to getting together with staff and to proceeding. So I just wanted to thank you very much again. And as our Mayor Main has said, you've been waiting a long time. I'm hoping that 2020 is the year that we get some resolve and we can move forward. Thank you.
All right. Just as the last point, I happen to agree with the CAO. I just do not see us getting it done by April. I don't see us getting it done at all over this summer. I'm sorry, as much as I'd love to be able to wave the magic wand and get it done, it just doesn't make sense that we can get all of this completed within the time frames that are necessary. But we sure as heck can make sure we have it ready for you by the spring of next year, if that's what ends up being. I think the most important part now is to get the ball rolling and hopefully rolling downhill so it picks up some speed. So I think that's where I'd like to go. So having said all of that, let's call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you so much, and I appreciate your patience. Thank you. All right. I bet you there's going to be a lot of empty seats in about 2 minutes. All right, we'll give you 30 seconds so we can keep moving forward at that point.
So I think Adam was wondering why you needed approval, or what we've done in the past, and why you needed approval as opposed to it coming out of discussion. So because it was a delegation and there wasn't any specific information,
Yes,
that's
no.
why we would do it.
Yeah. Wow, I can empty a room, can I? All right, let's have our second delegation come forward, if you would, please. The Parksville Community Center Society update to council. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Our update to City Council is a revised price list of rental rates for our facility. As submitted, you'll note that there is a price list for nonprofit organizations and a price list for private groups. The difference between the two is approximately 30%, not to the decimal, but about that. And in general, the price increase is, we generally went with a 2% increase in most categories, with a little bit of a factor for rounding in that. In light of our reduced operating fee, we felt that this was reasonable and hopefully will alleviate some of the pressure on the community center to work towards self-sufficiency and balance our budget. Thanks. If there's any questions, go ahead.
Caught me in the middle. I wasn't expecting to finish so quickly. First off, before we start with any of that, congratulations on Saturday. It was a great job, nicely done.
Thank
okay, for the spaghetti dinner. That
Thank
they
you for
put on.
coming.
Oh, my pleasure. Believe me, it was my pleasure. Any questions for the delegation? Councillor Greer and then Councillor Wilson.
I'd also like to thank you for putting on the dinner. It was very, very successful. And I appreciate your increases. I looked them over and they're reasonable, and it's great to see that you're working hard on making this thing work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Wilson and Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, through your worship. Yeah, I think I congratulate you on what you're doing. Just wondering, how comparable are your rates to other facilities?
In comparison to schools and churches, we're quite a bit more, a margin more. But in comparison to other conference centers that are the closest comparables we have in the community, which would be facilities such as Beach Club and Tainamera that have conference rooms, we're lower than those. So we're, I mean, for lack of more technical, specific terms, middle of the road.
Okay. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and it's always a pleasure to see you. I'm sorry I wasn't able to make it on the weekend. I've heard nothing but great things, and I do notice that your profile and Facebook page and community involvement has definitely increased. I think that's what I could possibly say. It's been great. Did you run any of your pricing updates with any other organizations, or just through the board?
Just through the board.
Okay. But you did look at, I think that was what Marilyn had asked, is that you did look at other facilities and everything to see that they were still quite adequate. When do you expect to have this go into effect?
Immediately.
Okay. So does that reflect on any, oh, I'm sorry, Your Worship,
That's all right. I was just going to let you go.
does that affect on any current bookings with the existing bookings, that they will be at the previous rate, or will they go to the new rate?
We've adopted a policy that if someone has a signed contract and an estimate with the old rates, then we would honor it. But moving forward, we would rely on the clause that's on all our contracts that said prices are subject to change. So we're implementing the 2020 now.
They are now subject.
And my last follow-up?
Okay.
Could you give me a rough, this doesn't quite affect your rate presentation and everything, but as far as your bookings go for 2020, how are they looking?
They're good, quite a lot. I know that when the society is trying to book events that we want to do to increase our community presence, we are juggling a lot to find a weekend available that we can use the facility for our own means, because our user groups are demanding quite a bit of our space and time. So,
would you say that you're busier in the daytime than in the evenings or weekends? Do you know if you have a specific, like seasonal wise, I can understand that you would be busier at different times of the year and that, but do you have a difference of day, like week versus weekends?
generally weekdays is more of a regular steady usage, and weekends, a lot of people book or groups book for an entire facility for an entire weekend, set up Friday, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. So it's a different type of booking when we're busy on those different days. I hope that answers.
Well, it's unfortunate that our pickleball delegation has mostly left, because I do know that there's pickleball also at the Parksville Community Center as well.
That's a lot.
So thank you for filling that need as well in the wintertime.
You're welcome.
Councillor Frass.
Thank you, and through the mayor. Thanks for the presentation for this price list. I know you guys have been working extremely hard over at the PCC, and it's very appreciated. My question is, I see there's a breakdown between private groups and nonprofit groups for the price list. Is it a requirement for groups to be members to rent and the facility out, or and with that, how is your membership base currently?
Yes, if they want, if a user group wants to take advantage of the not-for-profit pricing, they would have to become a member and pay their $10 annual fee. And the membership is up 4 times what it was last year. So for 2019, 2020. So
I guess if I can follow up through that, if a group has to get a membership, is it required that all of the users are members, or is it just one membership for a large group?
right now, currently, it's 1 membership for a large group. We're looking at examining that and maybe changing that, but right now, that's the policy that's been in effect, and we haven't changed it yet.
Okay, great, thank you.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, and through your worship to the delegation here, thank you very much again. You mentioned your price increase was roughly 2%, which seems fair, you know, considering most of your costs are labor and so forth. But have you considered, I was looking through at your coffee service, juice service, and the muffins, I guess your setup and takedown menu here. Have you considered increasing those? I'm looking at it and it's very reasonable. I've been at various organizations that have, you know, charged a coffee service, and they charge way more than this. They really do, because that's really where they make a lot of their money, type of thing.
Yeah.
You have to be competitive with your competition. But I was just wondering if there's any consideration as to maybe increasing your margins a little bit on your services or your food items, just as a way of just making a little extra margin. That was only my thoughts.
Yeah.
Did they also just go up 2%? Is that Rosalind?
They went up not quite 2%. Some of them did, and some of them didn't. We sort of listened to feedback from our user groups, and the items that we received a large percentage of complaints about, or just grumblings about high price, we didn't budge on those. We don't want to scare groups away.
Right, yeah.
And we also want them to use the service because it does have a good profit margin for us. But the setups and the coffee service, we did increase.
Okay, thank you. And as a follow-up, if I may, does the PCC currently have facilities suitable for, say, a Super Bowl Sunday celebration, like which happened yesterday? Maybe you don't know. Super Bowl was on yesterday, and do we have current facilities? The question came to me, said I would have loved to have gone to a celebration and celebrate with a bunch of other beer-drinking football idiots. I thought of the PCC right away. Do we have currently audio-visual that would be suitable to throw a Super Bowl party? It's just a question.
Yeah, you're shaking your head, but I think absolutely. We did have a group of football players that came that wanted to watch a specific college football game live, and they rented one of our rooms and tapped into our TV system. I think they live streamed it, and a group of young football players rented a room for just that exact purpose and had pizza delivered and that. So I think that it's definitely manageable.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just add to that? Of course, I'm thinking on a bigger scale. I'm thinking of the big seaside room and having big screen TVs, what I'm envisioning.
Yeah.
So a smaller room is fine, but I would like to see that if we're going to put something like that on, if it's going to be us putting it on, we'd like to have a big, huge room so we can fill it up.
So we don't have a big screen?
We have
It's a projector.
projector.
It's
It's
a
not actually,
projector.
we have looked at, we're ever evolving, so we have looked at maybe putting in TVs that we could have direct projectors and TVs that people can see. We have a concert or something, so that people are sitting in the back row can actually see on the TV the people on the stage. But that's just something we've discussed. It's not come to fruition yet, so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other? Do I have any other questions?
I have one more thing. I know,
Yes.
sorry. I know that you guys have discussed doing
some plan, maybe possibly doing some plans in behind where the grassy knoll is. And as we're ever evolving, we are looking at putting a community daycare in the building. And in order to put a daycare in there, we do need to have a play space for the children. So I just wanted to put that out there, that when you do decide to do something, if you decide to do something with the green space out there, that please consider to save some for a possible daycare playground.
Thank you. Councillor Fraz.
Just adding on to that then, I'd like to know, have you considered the options of putting something on the roof as well? I know it seems a little unorthodox, but there is a lot of childcare facilities, and they have up on upper floors with rooftop playgrounds as well.
It's been a brief conversation, but it hasn't been delved into yet. There's so many things that we want to do, so we have to decide which ones come first. There's lots of grants, like we talked before, there's lots of grants out there, and for seniors and for sports and that kind of thing. We have been approached by other pickleball clubs that would like to come on a regular basis as well, and putting, what are they called, the floor? Those little things? The holes for the posts for the floor. So there's lots of things. We're always open to options and always open to new ideas. So it's just a matter of putting it on the table and sort of, this won't work, this won't work, this won't work. So we're always open to everything.
Thank you. You're about 2 steps ahead of us on that question that you just brought up, but we'll keep it in mind if and when we get to that part of the conversation. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Having that, I need a mover and a seconder to receive the report. Moved by Councillor Fraz, second by Councillor Greer. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you very much. Reports. Vaughn, and give us a background on the issue regarding the installation of the public art at the PCC.
If I may, Your Worship.
PCTC, sorry.
At PCTC, yes. As per Council Resolution 19-338 on October 7th, 2019, staff were directed to look into the feasibility of a temporary public art installation in the lobby of the PCTC. The art installation is called Soft Shore, and the idea was to have it in the atrium. I'll read the resolution. That staff be directed to seek necessary approvals from the building owners to temporarily install the Robert Held centerpiece from the Soft Shore exhibition in the atrium of the City Hall for 2020 in celebration of the City of Parksville's 75th anniversary, and further that the associated costs up to $3,500 to install and light the artwork be approved from council contingency, and that was carried. So staff initiated conversations with the artists and the representative from the MAC, Macmillan Arts Center, in October, the end of October, to clarify requirements, locations, and other logistics. A coordinated meeting between artists and the MAC representative could not be scheduled until early December. At that time, the following was determined. So 3 potential locations, one in the lobby just outside the forum here, in front of where the totem pole is in that area. The area by the security desk or over near the elevator was identified, and the sunken area just outside the finance wicket windows was identified as a 3rd location. Lighting requirements and security of the art were also discussed at that point. Staff required, at that time, the staff required preliminary diagrams and design of the design and design drawings to fully understand the installation requirements. These were received in early January. The consultation with the stakeholders of PCTC eliminated all locations except for the sunken area just outside the finance wickets. Further, the public access for traffic flow, public open houses, and other functions were taken into consideration, and that's how it got identified as really the only spot that we could use. The one consideration there too is there would be an impact on the taxpayer time when the public is lined up in that area. We'd have to sort of redirect them and figure out a way to do it. We could accommodate them, but that would have to be sorted out. So the issues to be considered prior to installation were identified as a structural analysis would need to be done and sign off required to ensure that the art can be installed safely. It turns out that the about a 750-pound estimated portion of the art piece would need to be suspended from the ceiling of that area. There's 2 trusses there right now that would need to really share the load, so that was determined. The reason we need, it was recommended we need by staff structural analysis of it is we have to consider insurance, public safety, and the integrity of our current building components. Their electrical requirements require both power from below and above. It is anticipated that we can power it from the ceiling, probably from the existing light system or the fans that are there right now. And there is power at the base that can be utilized. As I was saying, the liability insurance for the artwork, as well as general liability, would need to be considered. The costs of those are really unknown at this time. We need the professional structural to take a look and basically give us a letter so that we can provide that to the insurance company to get a quote. We did meet actually today with the structural firm, and they're quite confident that this can be done. So, but it will likely require the manufacture of a metal component that's going to allow us to share the load on a couple of trusses there. So we know that now. They'll be providing us with a cost estimate of what their involvement would be in terms of getting their professional sign-off on that, so we'll know that shortly. So it's anticipated that the cost to implement the installation may be higher than the $3,500. I would say likely higher than the $3,500, but we will know shortly and have that number available at the next council meeting. If council approved additional funding, it's estimated that the artwork can be in place probably prior to the end of March at this point. And it's a bit more of a complicated issue than originally thought, but as I said, there are the structural components, the logistics of getting it done, the electrical issues, the insurance and liability issues are currently being worked out, so we feel we can get it, fairly confident we can get it done before then. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor O'Brien?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to Mr. Figuera. If I could, just on the question regarding you came up with 3 possible locations for the artwork, and then it was eliminated by the other partners in the PCTC, and yet they took out the location beside the totem pole that's right out there against the wall. I'm really wondering what the reasons was for that, if it was against the wall near the totem pole, any more space than I've seen the Soft Shore exhibit. I recognize how much space it takes, and I do recognize that it needs to be suspended from the ceiling, but I was just wondering if you could just touch base on why that location was eliminated?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor O'Brien. So there's a few things there. When we have public hearings here, we often pull the doors aside and it gets expanded out into that area. We've had a number of those over the course of a year. That would be problematic in terms of having it there because of that. The VIU has a lot of their ceremonies out here, and they use this whole atrium area in front of the totem pole for those ceremonies. There was some resistance there for having it at that location. And the school district was not in favor of that location just because it's used in terms of egress and access for the public through that area. And they felt that it would not be a good place to have such a display. And it turns out being a little bigger than you might think. I mean, I think it's 7-foot diameter, 6 foot, 6 to 7 foot diameter. Plus we would need a railing outside of that to go around it. Because in terms of liability and public safety, there was some concern about, we've got young children, 3, 4, or 5 years old, coming to the library, accessing this area. We wouldn't want them running into this thing or trying to climb on it. It could be quite dangerous, I think, for that to happen. So we would need to put some sort of a railing around as well. That's why the 3,500 identified, one of the reasons why the 3,500 identified is not likely to cover it. 1,000 of that, in the original discussions, 1,000 of that was to be used for staff to cover our costs, and 2,500 would be provided to actually do the installation work. I really have concerns about that figure, and I think it will likely be exceeded. I'll have the number next time for council.
I appreciate that, and I understand that the location anyways, but part of the reason that the location was favored at beside the totem pole is what we're seeing exactly today with the amount of natural light coming in. It just floods in there, and this exhibit just absolutely shines in these type of conditions. It really shows it off to the best effect. That was one of the reasons that, if I may follow up, Your Worship, just to ask, this maybe is through to our CAO. I heard it as a description anyways for the RFP or for the Mr. Figueroa's recommendations anyways, that this was a temporary location. And it was, I must say I was a little confused perhaps, as pointed out to me, that maybe I'm more confused than others. But I was under the impression that we were purchasing this piece of work from the MAC, and there was some pricing that was thrown back and forth. And if this is just on loan, I just want it really cleared up whether this is just going to be a temporary location, and if how long does temporary mean, and is there any option to purchase this and have it torn down so that we're not just building a large stand to hold it, or engineered piece of equipment to do it properly. That's my question. Thank you.
If I may, Your Worship, through you to Councillor O'Brien, the city would not typically be able to purchase something like that without going through a proper bidding process. So if the city had a policy that we wanted to increase public art or commission a piece of art for City Hall, we would have to go out to all artists in an equal opportunity and allow them to bid. We would set a budget on how much money it was council wished to spend, and we would have to basically let everybody have equal opportunity to compete for that. We actually have on our list for the committee that you have been appointed to, public art is one of the items that we're hoping that committee will look at in terms of a policy, budget, where that should be. Should it be developer amenities, or something that we look at for new buildings? So we can't purchase this without going through a competitive process and then having an open mind on any other pieces of art that might be submitted by somebody in the community or from abroad. So it has always been discussed as being a temporary installation, kind of in celebration of the area in conjunction with the 75th. But I think some of the items that have come up, the resolution from council was for staff to reach out to the building owners. That proved to be a little bit more troublesome than we had anticipated. But we were reminded that we did reach a lot of those same issues with the totem itself. It was supposed to be in the middle. And there was objection from our building partners for the reasons that Director Figueroa mentioned. That project also was around $150,000, which is quite shocking, I realize. But by the time you pay for the artist's time in that case, and it was a piece of art that we thought could be refurbished for a lot less money than it ended up being. And then we did have to provide railings around the edge, which were, again, more expensive, and drilling into the cement and affixing them and making sure that it was attached to the building. So unfortunately, I think this project has a lot more logistical challenges than was anticipated. And the only place where we have agreement from the building owners to put it is something that does negatively impact our service level to the community in terms of paying taxes, where anyone who's here at tax time or utility time can see it's quite busy in that area. So these were unforeseen things that I think we're looking for some more council direction on how much more time and whether council is actually willing to entertain a significantly higher budget than $3,500. I just don't see how we're going to be able to, we have to look at, some permanent holes in the floor essentially to put the railings in, and some permanent structural changes to allow the 750 pounds to be hung from the trusses. So I'm thinking we're not going to be able to get that done for like 10 times the price of what we're originally thinking. Although we will, if council wants us to pursue it, we'll certainly get that figure so that you can make a more informed decision. But we have spent significant amounts of staff time already, exceeding the $1,000, I would say, for sure. So unfortunately, just nothing's ever easy, and we're just needing some more direction from council at this point.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Worship. I can see now where this has become more problematic than what we had anticipated, and I can assure you from what I've heard from the engineering department that it's going to cost a considerable amount more. And my question is this so important that we need to go ahead with this project, or can we survive our 75th without it? And it seems to me that I would favor at this particular time, unless we have somebody that's willing to do a lot of work for nothing, that we should maybe drop this idea. Thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. In response to Councillor Greer's comments, it is expensive, and unfortunately, this was unanticipated, and I think what I wouldn't mind suggesting is that the artists themselves perhaps be a part of the conversation right now to see what they're willing to bear cost-wise, if they're willing at all to do so.
Anybody else have any comments? Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. And as a follow-up to Councillor Wilson's suggestion, I think that's a fair comment as well, that we could, because now we've been up at this time looking to a ceiling-supported structure. I'm thinking instead of ceiling-supported, what happens if there was an artistic structure that was set up like an arch, and an artistic piece of steel anyways, because there's already steel in it representing the kelp and so forth. What happens if it was a freestanding one that wasn't supported from the ceiling, would make it more feasible anyways to be moved in locations and so forth. It could be moved without, having to build a special bracket from the ceiling. I think it's worth a conversation just to have with the artists and say, this is the problems we've run into. It could possibly get shut down because it's insurmountable. It's just not worth it for a temporary installation. I totally agree with Councillor Greer. This is just not worth it. If this is just going to be up here for a year, I can't see it. But the thing is that, and it's not being in the location that we had envisioned in the first place, what's the point? So I think if we give it back to the artists, say, is there any way it can be self-supporting, that it doesn't have to hang from the rafters, that they could come up with something like that, because they're artists and they're pretty good at what they do. So maybe this is something that this could be considered. I know that the item itself is hanging in the Macmillan Arts Center, the old Macmillan School, which is pretty old, and they managed to hang it off at that place anyways, which is not the best of shape. So full credit to them. But I think it's possible to look at maybe another solution to this, as Mr. Figueroa has identified.
I'll come to you in a second, Councillor Greer. My concern here is that we're spending time on this, and the answer is going to end up being exactly the same, no matter how we look at it. First off, the location that they want to put it in my view, is not even secondary. It's way out there as far as what it would look like. It would look like hell sitting over there in my mind. So it's something that, A, do we want it to be there? B, the artists, when we talked to them, how much was it they were asking for it after it was? Yeah, it was like $80,000 they wanted us to pay them at the end of the year for us to keep it. I can find better use for first off the $80,000, I can find better use for the money that we're going to spend to put it up. Then we're going to have the holes in the floors when it's all over. Then we're going to have a fence that's down there to begin. I mean, the problems seem to get more and more and more. I think we just, again, I'm going to use that same expression, fish and cut bait here, and let's just call it a day and say it was a great idea, it's just not going to work, rather than keep on going on it. Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think the other thing, too, from what I gather, this could end up being a very dangerous situation, depending on who's playing around with it and what happens to it. But I'd make a motion, I could make a motion that we would forego this project for this year. I just don't think the time spent on it and the money is worthwhile.
I need a seconder for that motion if there's going to be one. Councillor Fraz's discussion. Take the vote then if there's no discussion. All those in favor of Councillor Greer's motion? Opposed? Then it's defeated. Okay. No instruction to staff at this time. All right, let's move on. Mr. Russell, could you please give us the background on the issue regarding the notice of for a liquor lounge endorsement?
If I may, Worship, for council consideration is whether or not to proceed with notice for a lounge endorsement to a manufacturing facility. This is at Unit 105 at 425 Stanford Avenue East, and it's part of Bespoke Spirits, and it would have an occupancy of 10 persons in total, and it would allow them to provide more than a sample, to provide a couple beverages. At this point in time, council has two options. It can either decide to opt out on providing comment on this application, and that would then leave it up to the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch to undertake their own process, or council can direct staff to proceed with undertaking the notice requirements.
I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Fraz, second by Councillor Wilson. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Mr. Doxey, could you please give us the background on the next issue?
If I may, through your worship, this next report is in response to direction from council back in December of 2016. Staff were directed to go and to get information from the business owners and users of the Memorial Avenue street project that would be impacted by the proposed changes affected by option one, which was a one-way eastbound traffic with the public square at the east end of Memorial Drive. Staff over the Christmas holiday had sent out some letters and followed up with initiating a walk through the street with local business owners, and since then some follow-up with some of the missing business owners to figure out if they were on board with and supporting of that option or not. The information is kind of broken down into Appendix B and categorized into a few of the key themes that business owners had in question. They were consistent with questions that council had at the time around parking, access-related issues. So parking was one that was, I guess it came up, but it looks like through the preliminary concept plans detailing the street parking and the parking lot scenario, it looks like there'd be a net loss of about 2 parking stalls. Of course, it's still to go through final design and whatnot, but at this stage, it's not a huge net loss of parking. And with that, like everybody that we were able to get in touch with on the street was on board with and supportive of the project. With that, the recommendations are to proceed though with the prior recommendations based on the community support there, and that was to increase the budget by the $60,000 that would facilitate incorporating option one of the public square and the one-way traffic into that street. That would facilitate the additional public engagement and then the redesign of both the parking lot there and the street itself. So recommendations are per the report.
Thank you. Councillor Greer? Oh, wait, I'm sorry, we got to bring them, got to mover and a seconder on the motion first to begin with. Moved by Councillor Patterson, second by Councillor Wilson. All right, now.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have no trouble with the one-way street and what has to be spent to save the trees on Memorial. I have a huge problem with making a public square and having a road go through a parking lot. I'm down in the main street many times a day, and at any given time, you could shoot a cannon down the street. There's maybe 10 people at any given time walking around that area. It's a very busy street full of cars and traffic, and for me, it's not an ideal place for a public square. Public square that's in between two buildings, and that I just don't see the public using it. We'll end up with maybe some homeless people there and having our bylaw enforcing officers continually moving them from there. The Port Alberni Highway is very, very busy, and I don't see where there's enough volume of people walking around to enjoy a public square in that particular place because it's just too busy. They made the main street there narrow about 13 years ago, and it's very congested with cars, and I could go on about some other projects, but I think we should give this project a lot of consideration. I just don't think at the end of the day to spend that type of money to put a public square in that place. It's not a beautiful area, and public squares should be in a park-like setting, and I just don't see where the activity and the number of people are going to be around to use it. So I'd be in favor of the one-way street and what it takes to make the trees or get the trees healthy and so on. But I'm certainly not going to be in favor of the public square and the one-way street through the parking lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fraz.
Thank you to council through the mayor. I disagree with Councillor Gurr's perspective. I think the square is a good addition as far as a way to increase pedestrian traffic. While there may not be a lot of pedestrian traffic there now, even with this being a one-way street, I see it being more vehicular traffic, having the ability to visit the businesses, and while it is strange for a road to go through a parking lot, I see it more as a pedestrian street. I think it is our most beautiful street in town, and as far as the square being between two buildings, when I think of places like the Port Theatre and Nanaimo, they have a square in between all of their buildings there, so I'm very supportive of it. I don't see any issue with it, and I think it's an improvement on what's currently there. I haven't seen any major concern or negative feedback from the community either, so I'm going to support the recommendations as they are to go forward.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, through your worship. I agree with Councillor Fraz as well. I was part of that committee where they had public input, and if you look at the drawings, there's it will change the whole perspective on the street when you have one way, so it will become more walkable. And I think with the concept that it's going to connect to the Macmillan Art Gallery, that it will open up the space that will easily allow for town square, if you will, and I don't think the square is going to be that big anyway. So I think it'll be a welcome addition, and also, I guess, promote the idea of a walkable city. So I'm definitely in favor. Thank you.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. I am totally in favor of this public square concept, and to comment regarding Councillor Greer's comments regarding it wouldn't be used. The public square portion of this community interaction was well received by other members of the community. So whether we think a public square there is not feasible or not a good idea is really not part of the conversation here. The public has said that they want a public square there. They said loud and clear, we love this idea, and we interacted with all the engineering people anyways to suggest that this is a great idea. So I believe that it's time that we listen to our community to say that, hey, this is a great idea, let's go on with it. And other part of the solution of this whole thing is that councils, as far as I've been here, have said, we got to get on with this downtown revitalization program, and we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and we've done sweet Fanny Adam. And so the thing is that it's time to move on. And I totally believe that this downtown public square is the start of greening our downtown revitalization. And I think it's a great start. Memorial Avenue trees were planted there a long time ago, and that is probably the most beautiful street in Parksville. Not just my opinion, that's well documented. So the thing is that I think that this is the start to really actually doing something with a revite, and if there's not many people down there in Councillor Greer's estimation now, I believe that there will be a lot more people down, and that will be the hub of activity for the downtown core, and it will be the start of the revite. I think it's a very positive move, and I support this fully. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I echo most of my fellow councillors' support of this project. I think it's going to be absolutely lovely, and as Councillor O'Brien did mention, I think it's the beginning and the start of greening up some of the downtown and having either whether it be a public art or public space. I'm very pleased to see that. I'm also wanted to just kind of reiterate that we did have good feedback and respondents and everything from businesses, business owners, and people that are located on Harrison and Memorial and the Alberni Highway. So that was really positive to see. But the discussion and everything that took place was very much in favor of this project going forward, and I'm hoping that we will get to see that start in 2020.
Thank you. First off, I'm going to strenuously disagree with Councillor O'Brien. It's not the most beautiful street in Parksville. It's one of the most beautiful streets on the island, as far as I'm concerned. So I have a question for staff, if I may. The comment is everybody that could were contacted. How many could and could not when we went back and talked to the businesses?
If I may, through your worship, everyone was contacted. When we went back through to walk the street, not everybody was available. We left business cards and a copy of the letter to contact our office. Some did subsequently contact the office, and some suggested that they wanted to, and they haven't gotten around to it yet. And just because of the timelines of trying to report back in January, and here we are, February 3rd, we weren't able to, force them to contact us.
Understand. Question is how many?
Out of
like, I don't have any idea. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to put it in perspective. How many people, how many businesses are on that street that face onto that street? And out of that, how many said yes, they were in favor, and no, they weren't? That's all.
We didn't get any negatives, and oddly, I do not have the number of people that were not respondent. So,
Pardon me? Out of? Okay. That is why we sent it back to staff, was to get those numbers. No, I don't. I mean, we can keep bringing it back, but it's. I mean, I think that if we took it here and just. My next question is: this is $60,000 more to put the square in. Is that the way I'm understanding this?
yes, that's to facilitate some of the continued public engagement around getting information as to what exactly is in the square and how it will be configured, and then the actual design, and then those are the two main factors.
And how much, just refresh my memory, how much is being spent for the rest of Memorial Street?
It's approximately
1.75 million would be a good number?
1.75 is the budget for construction. The budget for
That's the number that you will
Yes.
hold to, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I understand. I was just reminding him. That's okay. It's okay. All right. I see you, Councillor Greer. I'm just waiting for my answer.
I'm sorry, for me, through your worship, the budget for the The construction for 2020 is 1.75 million. The estimated cost with the option one was about 1.5 million. The consultation budget for the project is 290, it's just shy of 293,000.
Okay, so we're pushing the underside of $2 million is what I'm hearing from you. Nothing's cheap anymore, is it? All right. Councillor Greer?
Well, I'd just like to make another comment. That's a lot of money, for one thing. And the 60,000 additional that's required, is that going to cover, I'm not so sure what we're going to have in this town square. Is it just benches? Is it going to be fountains? Is there going to be a stage? Are all those things going to be extra? Or is this just going to be an area with some benches?
If I may, through your worship.
You may, please.
The estimate is based on the consultant's prior experience with similar types of open spaces or public spaces. So it's based on an assumption that there would be a certain amount of decorative pavement or concrete. There would be some park benches and some trees. Of course, depending on what they come back with the engagement, it could be that the level of, say, public art or benches may be at a much higher level than what is anticipated from other projects, and so we may see an increase from that, or it might be that our envisionment for that area is a much more organic, passive space, and it could be significantly less than that on the impact of the constructed cost. So the $60,000, I should point out, is not the construction aspect. That is covered in the $1.5 million estimated project cost. So.
Understood. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Then I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? We'll note that Councillor Greer has opposed this, and it has carried. Thank you. Mrs. Keller, would you give us a background on the next issue, please?
Thank you, Your Worship. If I may, through you to Council, we have an opportunity to apply for some UBCM grant funding to obtain some supplies for our emergency program. There has been identified gap in the region for things like lodging supplies if we needed to evacuate an apartment building or a larger scale residential area. Essentially what we would need is portable supplies like cots, blankets, pillows, that type of thing, so that would enable us to set up an emergency shelter for residents who have to leave their homes perhaps overnight or for a period of time due to an emergency such as flooding or in our case, we had a recent incident where we had an apartment fire and not everybody was able to be accommodated in local hotels. This is more of a concern during our peak season when hotels are pretty scarce and difficult to find at short notice. And we have partnered with the town of Qualicum Beach in this case. We tend to do this quite often so that we can improve our access to resources, and the town of Qualicum will then apply for something else that's been missing, or the regional district will apply. So council may be aware we obtained 100% funding to have a pet trailer a number of years back, and then at that time council or Qualicum applied for electronic equipment essentially for the EOC, which is the Emergency Operations Center. So it allows us to bolster the program at no cost to the local taxpayer, and we basically don't have to match the funding or anything. It's 100% covered cost. We are able to apply for up to $50,000 for this, and our estimates working with our emergency program coordinators are that we would be able to provide everything for this area for $41,000. And we need a council resolution to apply for the funding. If at any time it turned out that we didn't get 100% of the cost, we would come back to council, and at that time council could cancel the program or decide if they wanted to actually fund the shortfall. In the past, we have received 100%, so that has been encouraging, and recommendations are per the agenda.
Thank you. I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Fraz, second by Councillor Wilson. Are there any discussions on this? Councillor Patterson? Do you have your Fraz?
Did you want to go first, Councillor Fraz, since you seconded?
He said go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to mention, especially with this past weekend, with the amount of flooding that's occurred in the area, I do know that there was quite a few people that had to evacuate their homes and area. I just wanted to mention too that the EOC does such an amazing job with our other programs and the volunteer fire department and that as well. I'm absolutely 100% supportive of applying for the grant application, and as I said, this is a well-run, and the volunteers and everything as well are very much appreciated. So those are just my comments.
Thank you. Okay, Councilor Fraz, you're withdrawing? Thanks. All right, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Carried. You're doing well. Keep going.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Council. So as we were talking just about our emergency program, we are a partner in the emergency program for the region, and so that includes ourselves, the town of Qualicum Beach, and the regional district. And through the region, it also includes all of the First Nations in our area, and all of the other, District of Lanceville being the other municipality. So what, essentially we have a couple of agreements that govern our relationships there as partners, and one of those items is coming up for renewal, or has actually come up for renewal at the end of last year. And there are a number of things that we wanted to revisit and more accurately reflect in that agreement, but we ran out of time, partly because emergencies tend to take our emergency people away from us when we need to work on paperwork. So we're asking Council to just continue supporting everything as is for this year. This agreement basically covers our volunteers and the items we've obtained, like the pet trailer and other resources that we have when we need to actually activate an emergency operations center with our volunteers. And some of the things we're looking at changing over the next year is making sure that the program is more equitably funded. There are certain things that the city over time has taken on that are not reflected in our current agreement. So we pay for and take care of the emergency social services office, for example, and that cost has been borne solely by Parksville. And so while it's not a huge cost, we just wanted to make sure that over time that is more equitably shared. We do all of the administration for the volunteer coordinator, so that should be shared a little bit more equitably. We tend to do a lot of the communication for that program as well, and so we just need a little bit more time to actually get our 3 emergency program folks from the RDN, Town of Qualicum, and ourselves into the room and go through the agreement with a fine-tooth comb and revise it and bring it back to Council for a new, hopefully 5-year period. The next item will be the joint emergency agreement between all of us for when we activate EOCs and how they're run. That's actually coming due in 2021, so we're hoping we can kind of tackle both at the same time and get ahead of the next agreement that needs to be signed, and just make sure that it's reflective of our current resources, the current governance structure, and in fact, I'm not even sure that Lanceville was incorporated when we first entered the agreement, so it's just a lot of things have changed administratively. So we're just trying to buy ourselves a little bit of time, keep everything as is, and look to make it even better as we move forward. And recommendations are per the agenda.
And I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. Moved by Councillor Wilson, second by Councillor O'Brien. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Weeks, our new corporate officer.
Thank you. This report was presented at the January 20th council meeting, and council directed staff to consult with organizers and collect some feedback on the proposed changes. So staff have reached out to user groups that either hold annual events with large amount of attendees or that hold consecutive smaller events throughout the year with a large amount of attendees. Feedback was received from a lot of these groups. Feedback was provided to council for your consideration, and the recommendations as per the council agenda.
Need a mover and a seconder for the recommendations. Moved by Councillor Greer, seconded by Councillor Frass. Discussion. Councillor Patterson, Councillor O'Brien. Did Councillor Frass have his hand up? No, did you have your hand up? Okay, sorry. Councillor Patterson, Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Frass.
Thank you, Your Worship. I realize that this is at the policy review stage and that it will be advanced for the statutory process. But I see two of the gentlemen that spoke earlier are still waiting very patiently. And they talked about not-for-profit organizations. And I'm looking, if at all possible, we considered, or if we could consider, either waiving the application fee or returning it upon the end of the event, or something to... These are so many great organizations that give back to this community that I would really want to make sure that they continue in our community and that they don't end up going outside of Parksville just because we're trying to maintain the beautifulness of the community park. And although I realize that there are a great deal of costs involved with staff and that not all organizations or events leave our park in the condition that it was found, I think those are options too that we could look at, that if they aren't returned back to care. But I'm wondering if either that can be looked at with council's direction, or would consider the option of either waiving, or I'm not sure whether through our mayor to the CEO, if there's anything that can be adjusted at this point in time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hold on, we got crosstalk here. Go ahead.
If I may, Your Worship, I think looking at this, a couple of things would come to mind for staff to need a little bit more direction. I would say the majority of our special events are held by nonprofit groups. I'm just struggling to try and think of one that isn't nonprofit, actually, but yes, I guess the beach volleyball would be for profit, and I think we might have had a couple of others maybe that would be for profit, but most, if not all, and beach volleyball might actually, Volleyball BC is a nonprofit, so I'm not even sure on that one, but I think what we would need some direction from council is, are we looking at just waiving the application fees, which is a maximum of $100 for the large events, but we also had some other fees proposed to offset the city, like the city's actually paying or subsidizing through things like overtime for staff to clean the washrooms, or we are actually providing the power and the water at no charge, so it's not metered right now. So I think we just need a little bit more direction, fully understand, where council's going, but we tried to put this in place, I think, to recognize that the city is currently paying the amount. So if we waive it for nonprofits, I think we may as well kind of revisit the entire thing, which is totally fine if council wants us to do that. But we just require a little bit more direction on what it is council would like us to reduce or waive in those cases, because it's not just the application fee. We're proposing other cost recovery fees as well.
Okay, thank you. This is my list. Yes. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. Regarding the special event applications here, I cannot support the proposed suggested fee structures as presented, since there are a number of issues that need to be addressed. I feel that we have, I didn't know that the City of Parksville was looking for another source of revenue, and I believe that some of the services that have been identified as chargeable here are simply services that the City of Parksville should be providing to its community, and that's what our taxes go for. So I really believe that these are excessive. We talked about the nonprofits. I've spoken with different groups that would be affected by this. And it is an extreme hardship for many of them. Although the amounts seem small, it is still a hardship for those groups that have volunteers that are running it type of thing, and they're supplying all their time, all their labor to make their events happen and very successful. And we are actually very in an enviable position because our parks are well used. We have, I believe the CAO mentioned, over 200 applications. So I believe that we're a victim of our own success and the beauty of our parks and the great place this is. And I feel that this is not the right time to start charging fees for it. I do not, in particular, I feel the washroom fees are excessive, unnecessary, would be problematic, is creating a hardship for many groups. The single day use as compared to multiple days has to be addressed as well. Many people that go for multiple days or every Tuesday or 5 weeks in the summer are going to be affected hugely. And do we really need to charge an application fee? I mean, really, why? The thing is that that's what we do. We provide the service type of thing, and fill in the application. Yes, the applications are still necessary, I get that. So I'm really not in favor of nickel and diming the community, since I appreciate the community service that these groups provide. They provide a huge economic benefit to our area. They're an economic driver. All of these events that happen, all of the businesses happen. And then many of the organizations contribute back to our community through their charitable donations. So I don't think it's fair at this particular point. The city owns the park and the rights to it, and we can issue the permits, but I don't think we have to charge over and above. That's what our taxes already go to pay for. So I am not in favor of the recommendations as presented. Thank you.
Thank you, and to council through the mayor. I think we've got some great feedback, a lot of it very insightful from the public. There's quite a variety and range of different users, so they all have different concerns that are unique to them. So I don't think a one-size-fits-all approach might be the way to go. Maybe there's some tweaking we need to do along the way here, but part of this concern that it's stemming from is when we have the increase of, I think it was about 250% or so increase over the last few years, that's a lot of staff resources and time. And the way that we pay for staff resources and way through the city is by taxation. So we are charging everybody for certain user groups to be able to have their events in the park. I personally don't think that's fair to do, because then you're charging people that maybe are not even interested or wanting to participate or have any concern of it. They're still paying for it. That's good for some things like with healthcare or for schooling but not for special events. These, I haven't had any correspondence coming back saying that these fees were unreasonable. I think they are very low. There are things that I would suggest, like changing perhaps for the under 50 attendees, that $25 application fee. I think it would be reasonable to waive that, so small groups or birthday parties and that aren't being charged for things like using the gazebo. But as groups get larger, if they have the support and the membership to enjoy their events, then the victim of the success is through their own success of those events. It means they have to change along the ways. One way or another, somebody's paying these costs. There's things like the first aid, perhaps, that I question, though, if that's something that we should really be concerned about, if that's our business in an application process. And things like Councillor O'Brien mentioned with multi-day groups and organizations. So maybe we need to go through it a little bit more piece by piece, but I do think that we need a solution to this problem. And as much as people have raised concerns, nobody has brought it forward any alternative, and the problem's only going to continue to grow. So I know after events happen, people complain that the parks are left a mess, and if we don't have the staff available to clean up the washrooms or the garbages, then what are we left with? The day-to-day users are the ones that suffer.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So Councillor Fraz said it very well. These were some of the issues I had. Just that who else is going to pay for these costs except staff? We have to up our budget for staff, then there's no other way of doing this, or up the budget for with taxes, because really, they have to be covered some way, somehow. I know I asked our CAO to get some information about the first aid and the use of city equipment. It's all right if I perhaps go read this. The reason we include the requirement for first aid in the review was a result of calls we received during the summer months from attendees to the larger events that said they could not locate a first aid station when needing it. If there was a designated area, it was not easy to find, and ultimately the city gets the complaints. When we were doing the research of other municipalities, the large events required designated first aid tents or at least a first aid kit easily accessible. As far as the use of city equipment, the city provides equipment such as barricades, delineators, and cones for a number of events, and to be honest, they are not always returned undamaged and are sometimes short, 1 or 2. Also is the staff time to relocate the equipment, 20 to 40 plus pieces in the yard for pickup, and assist the organizer with loading and unloading their vehicles when picking up and dropping off. The cost is minimal to rent locally. 3-foot delineators are $3 a day, $9 a week, $20 a month. 10-foot barricades are $5 a day, $15 a week, or $25 a month. So the other thing I did want to ask our CAO is, are these costs in line with other communities that we are proposing?
They're actually lower from what the research we've done.
Follow up?
Yep.
Sorry, follow up.
Go ahead,
Thank
please.
you. The other thing I was going to ask is whether or not these fees would be charged now for this year when some of the events have already been planned, or would they be for next year?
That would be up to council, but if it's passed the way it is right now, it would be effective for this year. But again, up to council when the bylaw would be adopted, that's when they'd be effective.
Thank you, Your Worship. I support these increases. I realize the programs that the volunteers put on are fantastic for the city. But on the other hand, we're just at the beginning of what these are all going to cost us. Every year, the cost is going up further and further. And we have to look at our taxes. And in a couple of months, we're going to pass a budget, and we're going to be hollered at if our taxes go up. That's all I hear is a concern about taxes. The demand on the city staff is getting greater and greater, and I think we have to cover our bases. I even look at the ball diamond. We spend a tremendous amount of time on the ball diamond and the leagues that play there. And when I look at the people who are playing baseball there, and a lot of them are old-timers, half of them don't even come from Parksville. So we're supplying all these facilities, and we've got to cover our butts, or else our taxes are going to go out of sight, because things are not getting any cheaper. Thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship. Firstly, to direct to Councillor Greer, mention the ball diamond, if I can direct back to our CAO. Are not the ball diamonds reimbursed to us by the RDN who actually run the permits on the diamonds? And if we are reimbursed, I believe you already said the amount on the last meeting, but if you could reiterate that, please.
If I may, Your Worship, through you to Councillor O'Brien, I believe it's around $170,000 for all of our fields that the RDN books for us. They give us basically a refund or a credit towards maintenance for those, all the fields, so Springwood, the community park fields, where else? I'm trying. I think that's most of them, yeah.
Thank you. Then that would somewhat answer the fact that $170,000 does get reimbursed to us for that. I understand what Councillor Greer is saying. Oh, it does not. No, it helps. It helps to offset the cost. It does not cover the cost. No way could they ever do that. But the thing is that my other question was, it was identified, what are the, Councillor Fraz mentioned, he says, well, this will help solve some of the problems. Well, I'm not sure what the problems are, other than the fact that some groups do take advantage of it, and they do leave a mess. They don't clean up after themselves. They don't return it to the condition it was before. Could that not be handled? I would be certainly in favor of putting on the application form a clause whereby is if the fields or if the garbage is excessive or if anything is damaged or abused during that, then we could actually charge back that, instead of charging all fees, but just make a contingency or in that one clause to say in the applications they already fill out that if you damage anything or anything, you will be held responsible. I would be in favor of that portion of it. The rest of it, I am not. Thank you.
Councillor Fraz, and then I will speak.
As we move forward and make some decisions on this, a couple things that I'd like to see though too. It's been kind of tossed around, but as far as the effective date of this, I would propose that any effective date not be for this year, but for the subsequent year, for 2021, for reasons mentioned by some of the correspondents that things are already booked. We're already into the year and people are planning for it. So I think it's good to be prepared and think about what could be coming in the future, and maybe it'll give us a little more time to smooth some things out. What I would be proposing perhaps is that we send this back to staff to work through some of the issues identified or some of the concerns by the correspondence that we received, the feedback we got, and make some adjustments without going through them one by one. Like I mentioned though, it was that I think the under 50 attendees we could perhaps remove, or there was things like they mentioned that the fine of not holding a permit was $150, but a permit itself at max was $100. So perhaps it should be an increased amount, maybe $250. And this was feedback from user groups. So we have a motion on the floor now, I guess, with the recommendations. But I would suggest that we defer this back to staff and to be expecting an effective date for next year rather than this year.
Just to make it clear, you're deferring the whole motion to, I'm sorry, when?
To advance back to staff to address the.
Oh, you're referring it.
Referring it back to staff then for them to go through the feedback and
okay.
we received.
I need a seconder for that motion. Oh, everybody. Okay, we'll pick Councillor O'Brien. He had his hand up pretty quick there. All right. I think you have to know on referrals you can, on deferrals you can't. Mm-hmm.
With that, the request that the aim would be that this would be effective for 2021 then. So
You're changing.
That was just clarifying what my initial comment was.
Okay, so no, are you sure? I'll bet you, but okay, I'll let it go. All right, well then I don't get to talk as usual, so it's all right. We'll call the vote. I'm willing to do this because I think the referral is a good idea. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Check it and see. Sorry, we didn't get to answer your question for you, but yeah, there we go. I need any notices of motion that are on Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I would like to, in all fairness to the Soft Shore Group, I'd like to make a notice of motion for staff to meet with the artists regarding costs or perhaps finding another location and solving some of the other issues, just out of respect, I think, more than anything else, for all of the work that's been done so far.
Okay, so that'll come up at the next meeting. All right, any other notices of motion? Yeah, we need to do it in a closed meeting. We could quickly run one quick closed session if we want. Yeah, because I'm going to need it. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to propose a notice of motion for the next meeting anyways for discussion of council meeting times, which would be meeting dates, actually, if we could have that discussion at the next meeting.
Additional council meetings, are you speaking to?
Yes, yes, additional council meetings possibility. Specifically, the elimination of August as council meeting dates, as re-implementing August as a council meeting date.
Yeah, you can bring that back anytime.
Next meeting is okay?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, bring it sometime when we're all here. All right, anything else? New business? Any new business? Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship. The PDBA has a few items that they would like me to mention. There is going to be the AGM held March 3rd, which we are, as a council, are invited to. And Sergeant Pelche spoke to the board about safety and security for Parksville businesses, the impacts and mitigation options. So hopefully he's going to be speaking at the AGM as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other new business? Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Wilson reminded me, as she has her book in hand, in regards to 50 years of celebrating a caring community. So I wanted to thank the SOS actually as well for donating a book to all of the councillors. I've seen it in the past, so it's amazing. And I also wanted to bring it back to Councillor Wilson to just give another little update on Parksville 75th, as I wasn't in attendance at the last meeting. If she would be so kind.
It's on the agenda for for the next meeting, so if you don't mind. Yep, please. And it'll be, the two co-chairs will bring it. We'll be giving that. All right. Anything else? I'm going to ask you for a favor. I'm going to ask that we adjourn into a closed session for 5 minutes at the maximum, only if we could. I have something I want to talk to you about very quickly, and if we could do that, I'd appreciate it. So I need a motion to adjourn into closed. Councillor Greer, second by Councillor O'Brien. Okay. It's to discuss an identifiable person, so that's the reason. All right, all those in favor? Thank you. All right. Closed meeting, and thank you very much, folks, for coming.